One.
Welcome to Never Had the Pleasure, a YouTube show on YouTube where we talk about things that we've never seen before.
We just reviewed the original Top Gun. This is going to be more Fast and Furious shoot. We're just going to bang it out.
Like, we're hitting Mach 10.
I don't want any references. This is getting glowing reviews.
Those expectations are pretty high.
Pretty sky high. And I'm going to stop doing that. Nah.
I liked this and I thought it was good.
Whoa, we're getting into it.
This is a movie that is, if not by design, then by quality, multi-quadrant.
All of the emotional themes here definitely appeal to people who grew up with Top Gun, taken with the fantasy of being a part of that world, or people who were actually part of the military. This movie is for men who drink coffee without straws. By that, I should say that this movie was for me as well. This movie is as close as you can get to a theme park ride on a big screen. We're just gonna deal a general spoiler alert. We will be talking about the very impressive ending. Spoiler alert for my take.
Well, let's consider this a review for people who, like us, saw the movie early, just kind of scrolling through thumbnails for the advanced reviews. The hottest take for this movie is that this is better than the original. What's your stance on that?
The original has the nostalgia going for it, a little bit more goofiness to it, which we talked about in our review with all of the unintended homosexual subtext.
Sure, yeah.
Which here is pretty much non-existent.
Yeah, the female gaze is not invited.
Ugh, the male gaze. Yeah, they're all a bunch of gays. No.
I mean, there is still an obvious homage to the volleyball sequence, but I do think having a woman in the Top Gun class as a prominent character helps deflate that bubble.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised there was never a winking joke about no homo, bro. I don't know.
It must have been a conversation that they had at the writer producer level of do we wink and nod to this obvious and much discussed legacy of the film. Like you were saying, there's a very clear homage to the volleyball scene in the center of this movie that just is not edited the same way to celebrate the male form to as extreme a degree.
It's still a group of very fit young men shirtless on the beach playing football, but just the way that they shot it doesn't linger on their bodies as much. All of that is to say this movie is a much more straightforward action film, less focused on the hangout vibe of the original. Pretty much from the beginning we're given an end goal for the training that
they lay out the details of their Death Star trench run right up top.
Exactly. Which I think helps set the stakes for this movie. It's not just who's gonna be the best one.
Who's gonna get to come back and teach.
There's still the interdynamics of who's gonna make the team for this mission, but right from the beginning we understand people's lives are on the line here, and there's a very concrete goal that needs to be accomplished here, or else bad things will happen.
Yeah, by doing that, this movie did a better job than the original of enforcing the stakes consistently. We talked in our review of the original about how, for the majority of the movie, the risks and the threats of being a fighter pilot are entirely theoretical until they aren't. Whereas in this one, maybe intentionally kind of reckoning with that flaw of the original. Tom Cruise, in his briefings with these pilots, is saying, is there an excuse that you could give for what happened that your wingman's family would accept at the funeral? Which is a very visceral way to convey that you are responsible for other people's lives.
Maverick is trying to instill all of that, but also key to making this mission happen is the whole idea of you have to toss out the textbook.
You need to not think about your own limits. You need to not think about the mechanical limits of your aircraft.
Opposing maybe the message in the first film. In the original, we get a sense of the debate between by the book versus doing what needs to be done. To me here, that was clearer.
The first film doesn't maybe have the clearest message.
The good guys win in the end because Maverick's a risk taker, but I guess we're supposed to also take from that movie that he won't let what happened to Goose happen again. But how
Maverick is kind of an answer. One part plot armor, one part the team working well together.
Yeah, and I think Maverick's approach is more understandable in the context of this film because doing things by the book is only going to get you so far.
And like crucially for this mission, going by the book is not going to get you far enough. The movie smartly sets parameters for succeeding that require Maverick to be who he is.
Again, not to get into spoiler territory too much, but like to get into spoiler territory in the like final mission run sequence, things do go according to plan for the most part until they don't. So, I mean, Cruise and the director here...
Oblivion, man. Just in Oblivion.
I think, like, the pairing of, like, Cruise and McQuarrie, Cruise's, like, right-hand man, who I know was, like, involved in the return of Top Gun very early on, making action scenes exciting and legible and dynamic. They're like Ocean's 11 scene of going through the plan.
Right.
Those are all just like textbook Cruise McQuarrie. And I think like the tech advances that have come over the past 36 years are just evident in all of those scenes. Like we're able to get like IMAX cameras in the cockpits.
And outside the cockpit
Yeah.
on the plane. And some of the coolest shots.
In the first movie, there's so much just like seeing planes in which like we can't see who's flying it because of the advances with tech. They're able to shoot the actors taking off, getting information with the other planes, tracking where everyone is in relation to everyone else.
Yeah, they can get much more holistic coverage.
Yeah.
I would say, than was possible in the 80s.
Yeah, which helps someone like me immensely in like understanding what's going on.
That might have been part of why they structured the movie as they did, where the whole movie is not just training the characters for how the ending is supposed to go, but the audience as well. It's a very legible action scene because you, like the characters, have been training for it the whole movie.
Yeah, this crew is so good at like placing priority on that. We see them reviewing their time trial simulation.
Yeah. Seeing like the way that they kind of like cut through the canyon, they go up over the lip, they hit the target, they come out in that steep climb, right? Like we have also seen that on screen represented in different ways like a dozen times. Maybe the team on this new movie, going back and watching the original, also saw that some of those action scenes weren't like super clear in who was doing what, who was where in relation to each other. The structure of this movie was like kind of an ingenious way to like spoon feed the structure of the final sequence to the audience.
And structuring this where like we know the mission going into the movie, you're allowed to keep your eye on the prize and have this movie be about more than just who's number one.
And I think like credit where credit's due, structuring your movie like that, where like basically the entire thing is, like you said, doing time trials for the big set piece at the end, could have and maybe should have been pretty rote and boring. And I think it is to this movie's credit, to Cruise's credit, to the young cast's credit, that it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel repetitive and boring. I don't think it's controversial or a secret to say that Tom Cruise has a little bit of a messiah complex, and some of his more recent movies, it's been like in the text of the movie that like he is obsessed with like bringing the whole team home. If I had a small bone to pick, the ending was a little bit like defanged by having nobody die.
Nobody died.
Nobody died.
And I think also by the fact that like we see Cruise do the run pretty perfectly already. So like we know that it can be done. But then seeing the whole team doing it in the actual physical space as opposed to like the training grounds is exciting and edge of your seat.
I was expecting that they'd kind of get thrown off course in that final action sequence a little bit earlier on in the run than actually happened.
They achieved the mission, and then to bring everyone back, there are more hurdles than anticipated.
Looking at it that way, that is kind of like thematically a good fit. Cruise's job is to train them up to that standard but his personal mission is obviously to right the perceived wrongs of his past by making sure everyone comes home. It makes sense that it's that part of the mission that people have to make the most sacrifices to accomplish. I kind of thought for a second that the way they were gonna introduce I guess like death into this like war scenario was at the end when like Hangman comes to save them. Just like the way that Hangman was talking, I thought for like a couple seconds there that like he was gonna get shot down by like another bandit.
I had to swoop in and save you guys.
Yeah.
I could see the like finale being constructed in a way to allow for that moment to happen. I wonder if they're setting up sequels.
It seems like it.
Keeping characters around.
Taking a page from the 5 Cream playbook.
By that, everyone understands you to say Scream 5, including me.
That's what the green screen
just
for.
now, when we were introduced to Bob, the like nerdy, what's the like rear guy's name? The guy who says like plane coming over there.
Who presses the laser button.
Yeah. That was like such a setup for the like dorky guy to like get killed.
The like misdirect potentially. Like,
A little bit of like a Goose vibe, right?
yeah.
Even more than his own progeny. When the movie started, I kind of had a feeling of Star Warsing, where like everything from the first movie has like an analog here.
It was a lot of like the same like right up top.
The opening is pretty much identical. Same with like Goose's son, Rooster, singing the exact same song from the first movie. We get the football scene. My fear was that we would get even more of that. And I think the movie did a really good job of touching on the nostalgia without letting the movie get consumed by that.
Jennifer Connolly is back from her prominent role in the first movie.
It did feel like they could have just taken the character from the first film and like plopped her into that role. Cruise and her have this like history that we don't know about at all. It would have made more sense for us to have just like seen that history.
If we're gonna kind of like wade into the J. Crew catalog of the romance in this movie, in general, this is a movie where the script is very actor forward, in that this is a script that only works if the actors can pull it off. Tom Cruise and Jennifer Connelly carry off the material. What they are going through together is believable because they do a good job presenting it. But I think, like you, it's not really something that I needed as a producer. That is a textbook, very old school way to branch out into some of the other quadrants in your marketability.
For sure. To be more charitable, the stakes for the action sequences would feel different if he was just like single guy with no attachments. Like,
something that Rooster like flat out.
Yeah, they bring it up in the movie.
No one's gonna miss you.
Yeah, you're able to take these kinds of risks in the field, whereas like my dad was not. The fact that like we know Jennifer Connelly is waiting for Tom to come home at the end.
It kind of gives like his personal stakes some heft.
Yeah, again, it's like not necessarily what I'm looking for in this movie. I understand why it's there, so I think it was like well balanced.
I think that's a very good way to put it. It was well balanced. Again, this movie having the original to learn from, didn't have the issues of the first one in that like herky jerky
Yes.
jostling from like, okay, we're in a romance section, we're back into like the locker room bullshit. Unlike the original, where the romance was very weird and problematic, and that yielded some like really interesting and iconic moments. This one was much more deft and woven in and even keeled. It's not the like crazy up and down relationship of his youth, and that makes it maybe like a little boring, but ultimately it never really overstays its welcome at any point, unlike the original.
Yeah. Like you were saying, I think Cruise and Connolly do a good job here. There was maybe like a beat missing where I didn't quite get like a clear understanding of like what had happened previously with them. Her daughter talks to like, oh, you broke her heart before, and it's like, well, what happened?
The implication, I think, being like many times, because he's saying, I've climbed out your window so many times, this is the last time I'm gonna do it. I'm never gonna leave you again.
Yeah,
like,
and I guess
before immediately going on a death mission.
Yeah, and I guess like it leaves us wondering like why this time.
Now it's my turn to be more charitable. Look at us being all charitable. This movie does a good job of setting him at the conclusion to a chapter in his life. A lot of his past has kind of like come back to the forefront. He's having to reckon with it, with Rooster being back at Top Gun, with his old flame, with the way that he's navigated his career, with Iceman. And so it makes sense that he's kind of like revisiting decisions that he's made in the past and wanting to make different ones to kind of like break that pattern. That was my read on why he wants to handle things differently with Penny.
Yeah, you're right. Like there's a lot of reckoning with the repercussions of being in the military on your personal life. That like naturally comes up with Rooster being in the picture, and just like the passing of time and death.
What did you think of how it kind of wrapped things up with Iceman? Again, like this is a spoiler section if we wind up doing that kind of thing.
Did you know going in that like Val was going to be in this? Or was
Yes.
that like a surprise?
I wasn't sure if it was going to be like archival footage or...
We didn't talk about this in our discussion of the original Top Gun and Val Kilmer as a topic, but for anyone who has seen Maverick, he is going through a lot of health struggles. I don't know exactly where he is now.
The green screen will.
His lifestyle has changed a lot due to his battle with cancer, and that can be a long road. We don't often see people in like the throes of a health battle on screen in the way that we do in this film.
Which like definitely carried its own kind of power. It's a very successful scene, I think, to kind of like carve out a little space for the two of them in this movie, give it some gravity, let them have a moment together. That scene was to me like the clearest evidence of Tom Cruise having like really leveled up as an actor since the first one. I don't mean to kind of like take away from Val's role in it. He's the emotional center of it.
That's got to be tough to like have that kind of a scene and like his presence in the movie at large, to be like respectful, and to hear Val in like a
struggle to speak. There are actors that have kind of like grown into an ability to mine that inherent potency in their performances in ways that they just like wouldn't have been capable of 30 years ago if they'd made a pretty direct sequel, right?
These real people have aged as well and are where they are in life. That's got to be a large part of why people are responding to this movie. It's like a thrill ride for sure, but it like the emotional potency of what's happening on screen is even more so than in the original. And I think
not the highest bar. Yeah, I think like for me, the original breaks down into is Goose talking or not, like in terms of like does it have any emotional potency.
Yeah,
it was especially good, and I think like a no-brainer to give them like a very like solid scene together, because it's, spoiler alert again, the character's final scene, he does die. We get the funeral scene. The stuff with Iceman is it kind of gets at something kind of like at the core of this movie that there is some tension about, which is that in some ways this is a movie that really benefits from how much time has passed, and in other ways I think it's a movie where you can kind of tell that if not the script, then like the story outline is like 15 years old. And this is kind of nitpicky, but there's some ways where like it kind of strains credulity to have Iceman like carrying Maverick for that long. Tom Cruise works very hard at staying in peak condition. We know around how old this guy is. The human body just is not capable of the athletic performance of a peak career athlete, which like a fighter pilot is a kind of in its 50s. It's just not a thing.
And this movie doesn't let go of like
he's the greatest.
Cruise being the best pilot because he pilots the hardest.
Yeah, which gets at another parallel tension in Cruise's choices that he makes as an actor and producer. He has just in the last few years gotten a lot better. Like, I think he's kind of like, he sees the writing on the wall at this point that you can only deny your aging for so long. The Mummy came out a while before this movie, but it was only shot like 2 years before this. He's paired with a woman who's like, what, like 32 as his romantic partner, and they do a lot of the like face and body shopping to present a more youthful male lead. Like, just in the couple years between filming that and filming Top Gun, he obviously, like, in stuff like this and also in Fallout, the most recent Mission Impossible movie, has clearly made a choice to finally let himself age a little bit.
It's funny how he handles it though, because like he is allowing to like the reality of aging to come in, but he's
selectively.
Yeah, this is a Tom Cruise movie, and you gotta roll with his ego.
I get why it was made when it was, but it's kind of a trade-off. There are some things that I think play better now as a result, and there are some things that would have been a more of a fit for a late 2000s Cruise.
Maybe this is a way to get into talking a bit about Rooster. Rooster would be like 40 mathematically.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't quite
he's like born.
He's like, for him to be like a rookie.
He's what, like 4?
Yeah,
3 or 4?
Yeah.
In 1986.
Like, yeah.
That's the kind of like,
I guess
cheap
you just gotta accept it, right?
Yeah.
This movie is in 2022.
Yeah.
And it's also in 2012.
It was so delayed, like when it was actually made, almost splits the difference.
I could see them being like, oh, Goose's son is a Top Gun pilot, back when they were originally going to do this movie.
Yeah, and they kind of like, they try to, well, whatever. I doubt it's going to make the edit. You can nitpick, and I will nitpick, that kind of thing. Ultimately, movies are not like a census print, and they don't have to be like rigorously factual in that way. See also 5th gen fighters and like the enemy nuclear facility, which is just like somehow even more vaguely presented than the foe in the first movie. It's just kind of like, somehow Palpatine has returned. What are you gonna do? Like, ultimately, it's not really to the harm of the movie.
We're living in a time where movies are sold to so many countries that even more so than in the original, the enemy needs to be literally faceless. I guess I'm just thinking, like, where could they go with sequels? At a certain point, you gotta escalate things, and how do you do that without naming your enemy? But that's really not a discussion that we need to have right now. So yeah, we brought up Rooster, Miles Teller. I'm wondering what you thought about the new generation.
The personalities and the roles in the conflict among the younger generation here are much better delineated, and every character above the line, I guess, had like a purpose and a role in the conflict. It felt like in the first one that I felt like, frankly, a lot of the other pilots were just there to be eye candy. Wolfman and Hollywood and Slider, whatever. Iceman's wingman, or like backseat boy.
The like dynamic of this group, I think, is more central to this film than in the original. Like we talked about in our review, the first movie is so split between like the romance and Maverick's daddy issues, and then post Goose dealing with that. And this one, I think, was so much more focused on how they were going to work together, and this one has a very cautious approach, and this one's reckless. The like group dynamic had more primacy in the story than in the first one.
Focusing on Rooster there because like he is obviously front and center. I get that Miles Teller is at the very least a handful on set. I think he is a talented actor. He's another object lesson that I think a lot of even like franchise filmmakers, very like popcorny filmmakers have learned in the last few years, that casting like real actors who can bring real chops when they need to will somewhere down the road, even if you don't plan for it, pay dividends. It casts somebody like Miles Teller for a reason. You can draw a pretty direct like one-to-one from something like Whiplash, being like, yeah, this is a good fit.
In reading up a little bit on the production of this film, I think Cruise was like very selective and insistent on casting good performers for like the new generation, which is appreciated. A lot of times with like these franchise reboots, that It's kind of like the last thing on their mind, it seems.
They're kind of focused on like getting somebody bankable or like making Will Smith happy.
My parents always told me that people are making money. I'm just an icon living. I cry in a lot of my music videos, like real tears.
Whereas like Miles Teller is not particularly bankable, and I think like Tom Cruise rightly understands everyone else is just going to kind of fall in orbit around him. This movie was quite focused on Maverick. He's in the title for a reason. This is the Tom Cruise show. And so Miles Teller, for that role, for that character, like he doesn't really need to be bankable. He needs to be a good performer.
For sure. And that can launch off into potential feature films, right?
Yeah, which like, sorry, I think we were maybe both going to say the same thing, which is that like, I would be excited to see more movies with that younger generation. Of the new generation, Miles Teller is already pretty established. I think this probably gives his career like some HP points, I guess. It seems pretty inevitable that Glenn Powell will be the kind of like breakout of the cast.
Glenn Powell, I thought was an excellent, like, cocky villain guy. I think he's an emergent Chris.
Oh, yeah, big time. Yeah.
Which, I guess we haven't talked about this on camera, but we are strong proponents in the idea that a Chris does not necessarily need to be literal Chris. Hot take. Channing Tatum's the best Chris.
Up
he
and coming,
needs to be tall and hunky and vaguely blonde.
And like able to pull off playing Connolly.
I'll just say, Glenn Powell, I've always thought was good since I saw him in Scream Queens.
All right.
Just putting it out there.
I don't think I had the pleasure. There are other people that are really good in the new generation where their characters could like emerge more in sequels that were more focused on them. Fuck, what's her name? Monica Barbaro? Barbaro, I got it. In this movie, as it is, like her role is more subtle, I guess.
Yeah.
She's not like headlining a lot of scenes.
You're right. I think this movie is the Maverick movie. It's right there in the title.
But I think it does a good job of like beginning at least to pass the baton.
Rooster gets a lot to chew on. Before we get too off track with the discussion of like the new class, Rooster is very central to this movie. How do you think they handled the legacy of Goose?
This movie really kind of vindicates, I guess, the importance of that performance to the original by making Goose be pretty central to the emotional core of this movie as well, which I think just fundamentally doesn't work without the kind of performance that you got in the first movie with like a live Goose.
Put in hack twice by me, with a history of high-speed passes over 5 air-controlled towers and 1 admiral's daughter.
Penny Benjamin.
He humanizes Maverick a lot in the first one, because otherwise he's just like a cocky dick.
Yeah. And I think importantly, he humanizes Maverick. Charlie doesn't humanize Maverick. Iceman doesn't even really humanize Maverick. They're both playing to those kind of like cocky, irresponsible parts of his personality. Goose is the one who is kind of like the angel on one shoulder, which I guess is kind of like an unplanned way of talking about how this movie frames Maverick as having these like 2 guardian angel characters from his past. Maybe both of them are explicitly referred to as such. Iceman kind of like safeguarding his career, making sure that the naval air has a place for him. Goose, obviously, like much more metaphorically, spiritually, is that kind of like talk to me, Goose.
To circle back to Five Cream, he's the Skeet of Five Cream.
Boy, that's
at least they
ugly
didn't
way to put that.
At least they didn't literalize that.
Yeah, they didn't have him pop up in the rearview mirror.
Like to see them de-age Anthony. There's a lot of clips from the first movie integrated into this one, and pictures, a lot of it centering on him. The character's legacy is obviously tantamount.
If I'm even attempting to be objective, like they lay it on pretty thick with the like talk to me Goose, talk to me dad. His entire poster board is like just pics of Goose and his family. But I don't care because I love Goose. That's maybe another thing that would have played better if this movie had been made when the idea originated, I guess. This much time has passed and there has been seemingly like no other event in Tom Cruise's life that is like even competing for the kind of emotional resonance that Goose's death has had. Like in a subtle way points to how devoid of deeper human contact his life has been. Just kind of like very stuck in his high octane rut.
Yeah, the events in the first Top Gun are so central to what's happening in this film. It's almost as if like the characters just like pressed pause. I do want to express that like I went with it. With
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Me too. And I was certainly like biased to go with it because I got Justice for Goose. I mean, maybe it's not biased. Like, I think it is a legitimate critique of the first movie that it kind of glosses over Goose's death. And I think it does so for a reason. Like, the first one is much more of a, like, overt popcorn, like, fun in the sun movie that, like, needs to have some stakes but doesn't want to linger on them. So it is calibrated to treat Goose's death in that framework, right? Like, we get a funeral scene for Iceman and we didn't for Goose.
The ramifications of his death are like pretty cleanly packed away once Meg Ryan exits the first movie. It becomes all about Maverick's feelings.
Yeah, it's about him having the yips, basically, right? I am just really glad that Rooster got that little scene at the end where like he sees Maverick's corkboard full of Goose-centric memories. This being a movie with a very particular target quadrant is not going to have a lot of vocalizing of feelings. It's a lot of emotions, like in a very boomer Gen X way, emotions suddenly coming to the surface and erupting and then being quickly repressed again and then like addressed through action and deed. And so like I think it's fitting for that kind of movie that Maverick and Goose never have that like vocalized heart to heart of like I didn't appreciate your dad until he was gone. You can kind of debate whether like it should have been a little bit more textual, but it was really nice to see that like visually presented at the end. Film, after all, is a visual medium.
I guess there's a little bit of that, again, spoiler alert, when they're stuck in the enemy's valley.
Yeah. These movies are interesting for all of the things that they're not quite. Like, this isn't quite an action movie in the conventional sense that is entirely in the moment where there's kind of like an inciting incident that sets the character, the like action hero on a course where they're in risk, like, throughout. Like, it's a lot of time trials, right? Prepping for the big race. Like, it is about like iterating towards perfection. It's also kind of like adjacent to a romance. It's also adjacent to being a war movie because it's kind of like about the military, but in this kind of like abstracted way where
It's a war movie without enemies, basically.
yeah, the faceless but human enemies, even you could count on one finger, right?
One of the things that I was like, oh, it's a 1-for-1 with the original was the like repetition of the Gaga song here.
That song is so much less memorable to me that I didn't even catch it.
It did get like stuck in my head. It like plays in the background in one scene. She got like credited for the score.
I did
it's
see that.
Incorporated. And then they play it at the end.
I predicted that it might be woven throughout in our original Top Gun review, and then did not notice at all that it was.
I would say it was woven throughout more deftly in that they didn't just literally play the song over and over again.
For sort of like minor criticisms of Maverick, the soundtrack was one way. It did kind of feel like it was stuck in the past.
Especially the opening.
Yeah.
Like the score from the first one and the Danger
The
Zone
lighting
too.
and like Danger Zone being played again. So I did appreciate in scenes like the like dogfight football. I don't know the song, but it definitely sounded like a newer song was playing because you can only set your movie so much in the 80s before it starts working to its detriment.
Happy to inform you, it's a song by the hip, cool band
Imagine Dragons.
One Republic.
Anyways.
We are flying in different directions,
Yeah.
which is maybe an indication to wrap things up here.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
I think so.
Wouldn't you think my collection is complete? My collection of thoughts, that is.
Yeah, so I guess we're navigating out of the canyon, over the lip, into the conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I think like up top in this review, I kind of like asked a question that I don't think either of us really answered, which is good because it lets us kind of tease it for the conclusion. I get that for having any kind of hot take on a movie that isn't super friendly to hot takes, one of the things that you can do is say, is this better than the original? Or other than kind of like having something to put in your thumbnail, that's not the most useful way to look at this for me. I looked at this movie a lot more in terms of how did this movie learn from the original? How is it different? What does that kind of tell us about each of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think my take, which isn't necessarily like scorching hot, is that like this is a better film that couldn't be better without the original and without the breadth of time that has passed.
Broadly, I can kind of co-sign what you said. I really want to kind of like hold back from saying it's a better movie, whatever that even means, just for me personally.
It's the one I'll realistically rewatch.
Whereas, like, I'm not sure that's as true for me. I think I'd be about evenly happy to go back and watch either of them, but not necessarily even as a pair. Maverick is interesting because it's a very good sequel that obviously gave like a thorough critical look at what worked and didn't work about the original and maximized the improvements that it could make. And yet, like, despite being a very good sequel, it's a very different movie. They're both successful in very different ways. Looking at the pair is a really good illustration for the difference between something being iconic and something being good. Top Gun is rightly iconic. It has bonkers moments that defy explanation, and it has like visual trademarks that Maverick is on the whole very smart about not trying to bite. The core romances in both movies are illustrative of that as well. Like the relationship between Maverick and Charlie doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's certainly not ethical. At the same time, it's very dramatic, and it's a relationship that accommodates motorbike chases and crazy blue filter love scenes. Maverick is it's a much more like lived in, even keeled, deeper or more resonant relationship. Maverick as a whole does well what it knows it can carry off, and it is successful at that, but I think it also smartly knows what it can't top the original at, or what it can't compete in.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's definitely like sleeker and cleaner. The like shirtless football scene is not as memeable as the volleyball scene. This movie's working hard not to be like embarrassed by itself in any way, which is a better way to make a movie, but perhaps one without as much charm.
Yeah.
But I do ultimately just think it's a better, more thrilling action movie.
Out of 3 areas, I think it is better at like the dramatic side. It's better at the action side, although I think
For obvious reasons.
if you scale them to the accomplishment of when they were made, I don't know if that's still true.
Just for inflation.
Yeah, the action in both is very good. The original takes it on being like an iconic hallmark of a generation.
Yeah, this movie doesn't necessarily have the room for moments like I Feel the Need for Speed.
It's one of those things where, yeah, you could say one is better than the other. I think to a degree it's like about what you want to value, and not necessarily what you want to value for all movies forever, but when you're sitting down to watch one or the other, you're choosing one experience or another, and I'm glad that they both exist.
There's definitely a version of this movie that could exist where they're like desperately chasing for those kinds of moments.
Yeah, big
Right?
time.
Like, I've got the inclination for a vertication.
And I think, like, I'll say
or
that,
something like that.
yeah, and I'll say that, like, having charted a very different course, it's not coincidental that this is like Maverick's movie. It would be like sad, bordering on ghoulish for him to try to have those very cocky, youthful moments. But there is opportunity for any sequels that they make moving forward, focusing on the younger generation, to kind of explore the space in between in potentially some like pretty fun, cool ways.
Yeah, I would definitely be cool with them doing a third one without Cruise at all, or perhaps in just like a more reduced role. So, Sean, would you say you would run or walk to the theater?
I don't know how to answer that.
I'd advocate for you to run. This is a very well done action movie, and to me, those are very rare. You got to see this on the big screen.
Being part of that like shared like recognition of little callbacks and stuff was really fun. People should jog briskly to the theater.
Thank you for that qualification.
Yeah, I think this is a rewarding watch for almost anybody.
When the first Avengers came out, like our mom went to go see it.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of movie that she would normally go to see. I would advocate for someone like her to go see this. Speaking of running, you can look forward to a video coming out shortly from us in which we rank all of Tom Cruise's... See how I did that? We rank all of Tom Cruise's runs over the years. A summation of our Tom Cruise Ray-Ban series.
If you're still here, then that is because you enjoy longish, in-depth-ish movie reviews, and that means that you will like the other stuff on our channel. You are certainly invited to subscribe if you enjoyed our review.
I would say subscribe or you'll be dishonorably discharged from Earth. Okay.
Wow, you're really raising the stakes on the punishment.
We gotta get these subscriptions.
the stick and the carrot.
It would be great if you would let us know what you thought about Top Cruise Maverick.
At this point, I think there is nothing left to say except goodbye.
Goodbye.
Nobody died. We all made it home.
Alone again. Oh.
I'm talking 5 cream, baby.
5 cream again. 5 cream 2.